All right, good morning, everyone. I wanted to give everybody a chance to get in here and get going as we begin a really great discussion. Welcome to Real Talk on Education, Bridging the Gender Divide. I'm your host this morning, Courtney Robinson of 10 Tampa Bay News. I'm also a mom. I have a 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy, so I have a keen interest in the topic that we are discussing today. We gathered this morning to take a deeper look at what some experts have labeled a crisis, the growing academic divide between boys and girls. Of course, this is something that a lot of experts have focused on. And as we noted in promoting this seminar, boys will be boys no longer works in our society. 50 years ago, Title IX became law of the land, seeking to narrow the advantage boys held over girls. The number of boys being awarded degrees was 16% higher than girls at that point. Today, it is 18% higher for girls. This isn't to suggest that we need to push boys down to lift girls up. Feminism is not the culprit here. This is not a zero sum. We can elevate girls and boys, and we can also create paths, of course, for both genders to succeed. For now, however, the stark reality finds that boys trail girls through the education system. It's not by intentional design, but as we will learn today, we may be treating boys like square pegs that we're trying to force into round holes. And the results do paint a bleak picture. Nationally, on a behavioral adjusted basis, boys are twice as likely as girls to get suspended, and Black boys are 5 times more likely to be suspended. Women college graduates are outnumbering male graduates by a near 2-to-1 margin, and the split on college campuses is 60-40 women over men. 7 out of 10 valedictorians are girls. What's problematic is the gender gap is manifesting itself in new ways with young men, with some taking a complete break from society. 1 out of every 10 men between the ages of 20 to 24 are neither working nor enrolled in school. 15% of men between the ages of 18 and 30 have no close friends. Now, that same group of men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. As the American Institute for Boys notes, from collapsing educational outcomes to shrinking roles in the labor market, boys and men are facing real structural challenges that should not be ignored. For the next hour, we're going to learn more about this most pressing issue. And first, we want to bring in United Way Suncoast Education Vice President Nicole Brown to share some thoughts about how her organization works every day to elevate educational opportunity. Nicole.
Thank you. Whether we're collaborating with leaders for a major education meeting, connecting with school leaders at a conference, or convening stakeholders for a real talk conversation about the academic divide between boys and girls, United Way Suncoast prides itself on serving the community as a collaborator, a connector, a convener, and a multiplier. We've taken on this role since our founding as the Tampa Welfare League in 1924. Now that we continue to move into our second century of service, these seminal tenets continue to be a focus. Our Thriving United Way Suncoast framework, a new multi-year strategic vision, calls for us to mobilize and equip a regional network of partners to deliver integrated, sustainable solutions for financial security, community resiliency, and especially educational opportunity. United Way Suncoast touches almost every educational entity in our region. Our education team creates a measurable impact across our 5-county footprint with a complex network of support and leadership. It's a superpower. Yet, we don't believe that superpower makes us a lone problem solver. Rather, we seek to gather diverse voices in webinars like this one so that we can increase awareness of the education issues that need to command our attention of each and every one of us. The search for solutions begins with discoveries. Convening, collaborating, connecting, and multiplying always begins with a conversation. This is how we define collaborative impact. Let's hope this discussion leads us to amplify action together. At United Way Suncoast, we know that united is the way.
Nicole, thank you. And now to help us set the table, we want to welcome in Joaquim Boudakidis, a fellow with the American Institute for Boys and Men and professor of child and adolescent studies. Dr. Boudakidis has previously served as chair of the Department of Educational Leadership Chair of Child and Adolescent Studies, Faculty Fellow of Student Success, and Associate Dean of Student Success at Cal State Fullerton. Dr. Budakitis, we started by laying out some of those rather startling statistics about the academic achievement gap that we see between boys and girls. From your perspective, how much of this is about how we define masculinity in our society, labeling quote unquote strong men as those who play sports, are more competitive, establish power? It seems like we're not connecting studying, those good grades, and really pursuing higher education to being masculine.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to this conversation. I look forward to hearing from the other panelists. This question ties together a lot of the threads and the through lines on a lot of the topics that I think we're going to end up discussing today. And that particular framing is not new. In a sense, the idea of being a good student, as the used term uncool, sort of goes hand in hand with this idea of masculinity, not prioritizing academic success, because boys and adolescents clearly see that to do well in school is to be a rule follower, to be adult oriented, aka teacher oriented, to be highly controlled, to be highly self-regulated, and that ain't cool, to be honest. And so, adolescent boys really desperately want to be cool because they want to fit into their peer group. And a lot of this has to do with peer group dynamics, in fact, that can sort of act as echo chambers, especially around these ideas of masculinity. And at the age when a lot of these things become manifest, and we're kind of able to observe and study them, it's all about peer groups. They are the dominating socializing agents in these kids' lives, much more so than parents at this stage. And by the way, that's developmentally appropriate, but it doesn't have to be a problem. It's interesting because of a lot of the work I've been doing. I've been thinking a lot about my own junior high and high school experience. And I think, in some ways, I feel really lucky because we had this very mixed peer group. We had athletes and nerds, and we had kids who were very much both. And we had drama kids, and we had kids who were very into this particular subculture, surfers, punk rockers, you name it. And because of that kind of beautiful mess of a crew, nothing was specifically uncool. It was this kind of generalized support, mutual interest in each other's lives. It wasn't always perfect, but the benefit was that someone like me was raised by very traditional immigrant parents in a way that was all about traditional masculinity, didn't feel it was uncool or weak or whatever to do well in school, or to like books, or to like to read, or to want to act in a theater production. I also played sports. I also got into fights. I also did dumb stuff that everyone does. But at the end of the day, I didn't feel this pressure to conform to a particular kind of mode of masculinity that essentially separated my academic self from the rest of me. And doing well academically also felt like a kind of power and status. And I think that can appeal to boys who are often looking for status and power, at this age when they're sort of fraught with all these ideas of their identity and navigating these spaces. And a lot of these spaces around masculinity have become much more complicated these days, and have turned a bit into minefields, more so maybe than when I was a kid. But again, I tell parents all the time when I speak to them, or when I teach my parenting in the 21st century course, that once your kids hit 10 or 11, as a parent, one of the most powerful things you can do is to support healthy peer groups, healthy pro-social peer groups. And there are ways to do that. The other thing I'll just say, and this is, and I'll end, is that I think we also have to acknowledge that over the decades, schools have become much more feminine spaces. And it's exactly as you would expect when the percentage of male teachers and administrators, in particular in K through 12 settings, becomes more and more female. And I want to be clear, I don't think this is malicious or nefarious. I don't think female teachers get together and think of ways to stick it to boys. That's not it at all. I think it's just in any environment, educational, occupational, whatever it is, if it's dominated by one particular group, it's going to take on the cultural norms of that group. And that can create frictions for those that don't belong to that group. And so I think it's fair to say that there are going to be certain aspects of school culture and school structure that boys do not interface well with, or that can sometimes make them feel like they don't belong.
Talk with me a little bit about the science behind this trend. You've said that boys may be a little bit behind girls developmentally when they begin that formal classroom instruction. When it comes to that part of the brain where we're talking about executive functioning, the delayed gratification, self-regulation, those mature a little bit later for boys than girls, at least in my household. Is that one of the reasons that we're seeing maybe boys be suspended at these higher rates than girls?
I think that's certainly part of it. I mean, I'm definitely someone who believes that, and the research I think backs this up and has for decades, that males and females are different. There is this what we call, the technical term in my field is sort of sexual dimorphism. And it extends to some of the neurobiological differences you mentioned, and also a lot of hormonal differences that have these direct ties to behavior as well. And so I don't think it's just culture. It's not just socialization. It's not just differential parental strategies. All those things contribute, no doubt about it. But I think there is also a sort of underlying biology there. And so boys act out more. We see this across context. We see this all over the world, by the way. It's not just an American phenomenon. Boys are more aggressive. Boys overall do manifest more of what we call externalizing behaviors, as opposed to girls who are more likely to experience internalizing disorders, things like anxiety and depression. But I do want to take the opportunity to also say that, and apropos of this, gathering focused on education, that there's also a teacher expectation effect that needs to be addressed. So it's important to remember that almost all referrals for things like suspensions that you mentioned originate with teachers. And because of how we talk about boys and adolescents, teachers have come to expect boys to act out more. And they're also more likely to attribute behavioral disruptions as not only intentional, and sometimes they may not be, but specifically as hostile and potentially dangerous. So they are more likely to react in these ways that lead to this kind of school discipline differentials between boys and girls.
One of the ways that, or things that have been suggested in addressing that maturity gap, is maybe having boys start school at an older age. Is that one of the ways really to address this issue?
So I have mixed feelings about that. And in fact, funny enough, that's kind of how I got connected with Richard Reeves, the president and founder of the American Institute for Boys and Men, that I know many of you are familiar with, one of the leading voices in this space. I actually criticized this idea that was in his book of Boys and Men. And my position has sort of evolved on this, but let's say this. I have some concerns if this is the approach we take at scale. And it would have to be at scale to really kind of move the needle on these boy outcomes, to sort of do what we call redshirting them, right? To borrow from collegiate sports. So there's some potentially serious consequences. I'll give you some. This can put a real burden on some parents who rely on kindergarten, for example, not just as a sort of developmentally healthy space, but also as childcare that covers many of the same hours that they would be working, right? And so if they don't have that, then they'd have to accommodate that in some way. Second, for boys who may be experiencing learning disabilities, it's in school settings where they're often first diagnosed, especially in public school settings, and also where they get services. I mean, there are legal mandates around that. So if you delay that, you potentially could also delay diagnosis and the accommodations that are necessary. And third, if you're delaying the start of kindergarten, for example, let's not forget you're going to delay everything else. It's a domino effect, right? So high school graduation is going to be delayed, college graduation is going to be delayed, the career after college is going to be delayed, and so you have to consider all of that. There is some data suggesting you could help. I will say that a lot of that data is still coming from mostly white, mostly middle upper class families who may have the resources to make this work. And so I would not discount it as a viable strategy for a particular family with a particular boy. But I want to see more evidence. I think maybe if some schools or school districts try it out at scale and we get some good rigorous assessment and data, if it suggests it's effective, I'd be happy to endorse it myself more vigorously.
You touched on a little bit of the racial disparities here. A lot of the research does center on the socioeconomic racial differences. We know that one study, I talked about it at the beginning, points to Black boys being 5 times more likely to be suspended from school. Is there a greater problem for boys from Black and Hispanic families?
100%. The data is really clear. There are multiple studies, in fact, that show this. I think once again, teacher expectations play into this. I think, given sort of, the biases around Latino and Black boys in general, societally, I think that, bleeds into teachers' mindsets as well to some extent. Again, some of this may be unconscious. And so I think, those boys are often already kind of tagged as being potentially more problematic. And so any kind of disruption kind of can trigger this larger than necessary response. And by the way, I will mention this. It's kind of interesting. We even see this from Hispanic and Black teachers. They are not immune to punishing Latino and Black boys at greater rates than they will white and Asian kids. So it's something that absolutely has to be addressed. I know schools try to address it. There are professional development and workshop things that bring these things up. It's not an unknown thing. I'll also mention it from the student's perspective as well, because I think this is important to understand. There was a very famous anthropologist named John Ogbu, who was out of UC Berkeley, and he argued that Black boys, in particular, but I think this applies to Latino boys as well, are more likely to have a kind of antagonistic orientation towards school because they see and feel it as a kind of manifestation of the dominant culture, right? And they start to feel that the game is already rigged against them. So why bother cooperating, right, in this enterprise? And there is some truth to this. This is the issue. Success in school is good for everybody, but it turns out it's not as protective against the typically measured challenges in life for Black and Latino boys as it is for white and Asian kids. It does help. I want to be really clear. In other words, school success is still one of the most reliable tickets to a better life. And so there is this element, of kind of, from the boys' perspective, of cutting off their noses to spite their faces, to use a sort of old expression. And I think you have to address that directly. I think you have to communicate to boys, to Latino boys, to Black boys, to all boys, in a way they can understand and appreciate that doing well in school, being school oriented, is good for them. It's going to get them the things they want in life with greater certainty and reliability than just about anything else they can put their energy into. And I think sometimes we don't communicate that in a really direct, to the point fashion that I think may, in some cases, appeal more to boys.
Really important perspective there. I want to switch now to look at big tech, from social media to video games. I know it's hitting all of our students, boys and girls, but it's been targeted as one of the causes for the academic divide. But we know it's prevalent for students. Do we also know what's causing boys and young men really to retreat into these online worlds?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think it's a kind of comfort, and it's a kind of community. In fact, I think it's the comfort of a space that allows these boys and young men to make mistakes with fewer consequences, a space that is more freewheeling, a bit transgressive, a place where boys in particular feel they can express themselves without someone constantly, looking to criticize them or police them. And I also think it's a place where boys who may feel loneliness in their lives, who may be disconnected from, to use the expression in real life, IRL world, it's a place where they can feel like they belong. It's not always going to be the healthiest one, but again, to go to some of these old expressions, any harbor in a storm, right? And I think my views on the online space and the online world are also kind of in flux. I think folks like me have to kind of approach this research with a bit of humility, because we do risk falling into the kind of moral panics we seem to be prone to. I'm old enough to remember when everyone thought it was heavy metal music that was the problem, the devil's music. Then it was gangster rap, and on and on and on, right? If only it were that simple. We could point to one thing and say, this is what we need to address, and everything else will be fine. So I think when you speak to boys and young men directly, you may get a different story. I had this experience with my two sons. I have two boys right now, 18 and 20, much older, but when they were younger and they were telling me about their online friendships, I was really dubious. I was like, this is not a real thing. It can't be as good as an in real life friendship. And I got to be honest, I was proven wrong. I mean, both my boys have really strong, robust, real life, in-person friendships. I'm like, they're lucky that way. I'm lucky that way as a dad. But it was also clear that in a couple of cases, these online friendships, usually for boys made through some kind of online gaming, were very real. They discussed heavy stuff. They supported one another through difficult times. My older son got a friend to make some really important, healthy decisions. And when that happened, that little online community he had celebrated it. It was really beautiful to watch, actually. Some of these kids we've ended up interacting with in real life coming to our house, and it's just a solid group of kids. And so my sort of old man knee jerk reaction, my annoyance around all this stuff has sort of melted away a little bit. Am I still annoyed when I hear my boys yelling obscenities into a headset at 1 in the morning? Yes. Some of that is lockdown. There was a retreat to that because that was the only, kind of entertainment and social engagement they could do, and that's carried over to some extent. But I'm really clear with my boys about my expectations, and I think parents need to be. I think if you say that, if you're doing well in the things we care about, your schoolwork, your physical health, the way you conduct yourself in the world, your responsibilities to family, then, if those things are going well, what's my lever to claim that the time they're spending online is not good? I mean, it can become a time suck. There are certainly communities that are very problematic online. I won't go into all the lingo, but I'm sure many people listening here are familiar. And so I think we have to be careful about that. But, in terms of tying it to real negative outcomes, let's be aware that right now in the data, violence across the board is way down, including domestic violence, including violence against women. Attitudes towards gender equality of these last couple of generations are better than they were among my generations. So I think we have to be really careful about over attributing some of the influence of these online spaces in the discussion.
Needs to be a healthy space, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
I want to talk about solutions. Experts have offered a range of solutions, from educating teachers about the behavioral differences, recruiting more male teachers. You talked a little bit about that, engaging boys and young men in more thoughtful ways. Where do you think education systems should start in trying to impact that gap?
Okay, and I'll keep it tight. So one, we mentioned male teachers already. To be clear, it's not necessarily about doing what people think or imagine male teachers are going to do. The data on more male teachers actually improving the academic outcomes for boys is sort of mixed. But what it would definitely do is it would inject a bunch of healthy pro-social male role models into a space where boys are interacting, the most, right? Potentially. And so in that respect, I think it would be a very positive thing. Not to mention, it may also help broaden school culture in a way to have more men in that space working. The other thing is, I'm a very strong believer, this is the second and last thing, really, really strong believer in the effectiveness of mentoring programs. Right now, I'm working with Big Brothers Big Sisters of California on an AIBM funded initiative to increase the recruitment and retention of big brothers, in other words, male mentors, where there's a clear need. In fact, there's not enough male mentors. And this is a particular area where the impact on boys and young men may be even more pronounced than mentoring is for girls, for example, where it still is a very powerful force. And so I think it can address more about this kind of male loneliness, social isolation, and the fact that boys seem to be having a harder time managing their social relationships. So I think more peer and regular mentoring would also be really effective.
As we get ready to wrap up this final portion of our webinar, Dr. Abudakidis, what happens if we allow this issue to fester? If it goes unaddressed, what are the consequences that you see?
Yeah, not good. So you mentioned earlier, the increasing percentage of men that are neither employed nor in school. So that's a recipe for extremism to breed across, by the way, the ideological spectrum. If you have this continuing increasing cohort of undereducated, underemployed men, I think then you end up creating this kind of recipe for a growing resentment against the world, right? Even if it's misplaced, it's going to grow. And I think that's how you end up with these, very extreme, online communities, et cetera. where the idea is that they want to seek revenge, that they want to blow up a system that they feel has sort of let them down. And like I said, it clearly cuts across political ideologies. Let's make no mistake about that. We see evidence of that in recent events. So it's certainly not a good thing. And I hope we can address it before it gets any worse.
Anything else that you'd like to add here?
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Joaquim Boudakidis, thank you so much for helping us set the table on this discussion. I'd like to continue the conversation to a local level now. We've convened a panel of experts from our education field. Joining us, we have Dr. Sheila Halpin, Director of Early Learning for the Manatee County School District and co-founder of the SOAR in 4 program. Kim Joel, CEO of the Pinellas Education Foundation. Freddie Williams, CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Tampa Bay, and Thomas A. Williams, Chief Collaboration Officer at Planet Sarasota Director. We are going to continue this discussion. If you are joining us and you have questions, please drop those in the chat. And if we have time, we'll make sure that we get to some of those questions as well, whether they're for a specific panelist or for the entire group. So here's how this is going to work. We do want to address some very specific topics related to the academic achievement gap, and that will start with early learning, and then we're going to span into the grade levels. I'll give each of you a chance to start off on a particular topic, and then the rest of the panel, you will also have an option to chime in if you'd like. First, I'd like to invite each of you to offer some opening thoughts about this issue. Dr. Halpin, let's go ahead and open with you here. How does the gender gap influence achievement levels and behavioral outcomes in early childhood education?
Good morning. Analysis of Florida's voluntary pre-K program and kindergarten readiness data indicates that academic performance differences between boys and girls in early learning are small and not educationally significant. Both genders demonstrate comparable learning gains, readiness rates, and progress when provided access to high-quality early learning environments such as VPK. The Florida Department of Education does not identify gender as a major source of outcome variation in VPK performance metrics. Instead, differences in outcomes are more strongly associated with factors such as program quality, attendance, and instructional practices rather than child gender. State-required kindergarten readiness screenings show that boys and girls meet readiness benchmarks at similar rates, with only small percentage point differences that fluctuate year to year. And the longitudinal analysis from Florida's VPK program show that boys and girls who complete VPK are significantly more likely to be kindergarten ready than peers who did not attend, with no evidence of differential benefit by gender.
Dr. Halpin, thank you. Anyone else would like to chime in on this here? All right, Kim, Joel, I'd like to move to you because the Pinellas Education Foundation has really been focused on closing the gender gap for more than a decade. Can you take us back to how all of this work started and what did the research reveal about disparity between boys and girls?
Yeah, thanks. So it was around 2014 that we began seeing the consistent data, both locally and nationally, showing that many elementary age boys were struggling academically, particularly in literacy and behavior, just as we have already heard. So our foundation commissioned a white paper. It was titled, "Why Are We Losing Our Boys?" and convened community conversations with educators, parents, researchers, business leaders. And what emerged from both the research and the classroom experience was a growing understanding that boys and girls can develop and engage differently, particularly during the elementary years. Some of that research suggested that boys often develop language, organization, and self-regulation skills later than girls, but also tended to respond more positively to movement and active learning, spatial problem solving, and competition. Those are probably no surprises to any of us, but working closely with the school, Pinellas County Schools, we launched Closing the Gap initiative, and it was focused on expanding instructional strategies and giving teachers additional tools to engage students more effectively. Teachers receive the professional development. They actually go through like a micro-credentialing of gender differentiated instruction. And they learned practices that could better engage boys. So for example, movement-based learning, right? Including students rotating through stations, solving problems maybe while physically moving around the classroom, flexible seating. I know we got lots of requests for flexible seating through classroom grants. And I was like, that does not move the needle. Well, I have been definitely educated in that, and it does. When you see that wobble stools or different cushions and just different desks that can help support the students to focus and engage. We definitely learn competition and gamification type of strategies in the classroom. We actually have an annual Boys Read book battle. It started in elementary, and now we have it in middle and high school. Hands-on learning that emphasize building, experimenting, collaborating, mainly problem solving instead of relying on that solely passive instruction that maybe most all of us went through in school. And that, taking high interest reading materials, teachers would intentionally incorporate more action-oriented or adventure-based visually engaging books. So importantly, none of these strategies were about lowering the rigor or expectations of boys. The work focused on small instructional shifts that gave teachers more ways to engage students effectively. And what we have seen is that when students are engaged, achievement follows. So today we are seeing achievement gaps between boys and girls narrow. We have about 20 schools that we're working with specifically, and those gaps have been reduced about 5%. So we're seeing good movement in the ways that we need to see.
It's awesome to see those numbers as well, backing up all of that work that you all have been doing. Kim, thank you so much. Freddie Williams is coming to us from the Boys and Girls Club, and I can only imagine that you've seen all of these differences manifest. I know that you have a personal story as well from your upbringing that relates to the topic. Can you tell us about that, but also tell us how the Boys and Girls Club is factoring this into the comprehensive approach to equipping our young people with academic support, with those workforce skills, and with the healthy habits that they need to succeed?
Yeah, thank you, Courtney, and thank you for United Way for your continued ability of bringing our community together to find community solutions. I really appreciate the conversation, how it's been framed, because it's clearly not just about choosing boys over girls. It's about being honest enough to say that some boys are clearly falling behind. And frankly, if we ignore it, the consequences don't just stay within the classroom. At Boys and Girls Club, we see this show up in behavior, attendance, confidence, giving young people a sense of belonging, and in whether a young person believes in school is actually connected to their future. For me, you mentioned earlier, this is very personal to me. I was one of those boys who could have easily been written off. I grew up in Panama City, Florida, and I distinctly remember in middle school hearing a statistic that only 3 out of 10 Black boys graduate from high school in Panama City. And there were moments where people didn't see my potential. They saw disruptive behavior and maybe not having the research that's catching up to the practice of what we see in young Black boys. And they saw my behavior, they saw my attitude, and saw a young person who was heading down the wrong direction. And frankly, I was told I wasn't going to graduate from high school myself. But what changed my life was having access to a Boys and Girls Club that didn't lower the bar for me. They surrounded me with adults, gave me the mentorships and the mentors that believed in me and gave me the relationships. They held me accountable. They helped me see something myself I didn't fully see in myself yet. And that combination of care, structure, expectation, and opportunity was what changed my path. And it's no different from the tens of thousands of young people that we serve here in the Tampa Bay and the Suncoast region. Kids will hold on to your every word. You heard me mention earlier about this distinct moment of hearing, only 3 out of 10 Black boys were going to graduate from high school in my community. And that's why I think we need to be very careful and when we talk to boys who are struggling. The question can't just be what's wrong with him, what's wrong with the boy. I have a first-year-old son, or first grade son, here in the public schools, and we have to be very, very careful in thinking and the approaches that we have. My wife's a lawyer, and she always reminds me, like, you're the child expert. Like, can't you help us with this? Like, it's a little different when it's your own kids. But the better question is really, what is he missing? Is he missing a caring adult? Is he missing a safe place after school? Is he missing structure? Is he missing the reason to connect with what he's learning today and how it really impacts what he's doing in life later on? Boys and Girls Club, we take a comprehensive approach because we believe that every young person doesn't live in separate buckets. Yes, academic support matters, but so do this continuum of programming around workforce skills, healthy habits, mental health, and giving young people a sense of belonging. And, frankly, if a young person is hungry, if they feel isolated, if they're stressed, if they're bored, or they feel disconnected, they're not going to show up in the classroom. So the work is about helping young people build the habits, the confidence, and skills that they need to succeed in school and life. And that includes boys and girls, but giving customized approaches and making sure that we use the data and research to refine the practices and approaches that we take. When we build systems that meet young people where they are, we're not taking anything away from the girls. We're just making sure that the whole system in its entirety is stronger. And this includes new and innovative approaches that we're now testing and utilizing, including a comprehensive approach that uses, dare I say, artificial intelligence and data and gamifying educational experiences and supplementing caring adults in that process. So, very excited for some of the work that we're testing now.
And we're grateful for all of the work that you all do with the Boys and Girls Club. Thank you so much, Freddie. We really appreciate it. Thomas Williams with Planet Sarasota. I know that you, as we talked about, we're moving from grade level on up. Let's talk about that post-secondary education. I know that you are encouraging more girls and boys to apply for that financial aid to make the dream of a post-secondary education a reality. Are you seeing more girls than boys take advantage of those services, though?
Thank you, Courtney, and thanks to United Way for inviting me to join this esteemed panel for this important conversation. Are we seeing more girls than boys take advantage of our services? The short answer is yes, but it's how they're showing up. These are compounding issues, as Dr. Budakis said earlier. But allow me to elaborate a little bit. You see these starting way back with third grade reading levels. And Planet Sarasota is our local college access network, collective impact model, and our goal is to help students get an education beyond high school so they can be full participants in the economy and become contributing members of society, successful. So our backbone, the Education Foundation of Sarasota County, strives to prepare students for life by making sure they have three things: a plan, they have agency within themselves, and that they have access to resources. And so I spoke with some of our student success coaches because they live this every day with the students. And I asked them, what are you seeing? And they said, it's how the girls show up. There are more girls showing up, but it's also how they're showing up. And here's some of their observations. The girls are more broad-minded than the boys about applying for opportunities. They don't talk themselves out of trying. I call it they have that I amness. They're determined already. They're more planful and they think further downstream. They aren't afraid to put in the work to get to their goals, and they're conscious about and they hit their deadlines. The first no doesn't deter them. Our young men, on the other hand, they feel a little more pressure. Those who are coming feel a little more pressure to make money sooner. They're more money conscious than young ladies. They see investment differently. The young ladies think investment in their education, while the boys are concerned about investing or spending too much time in school when they could be earning. So they see it as kind of a trade-off there. And over the past 5, let's call it 7 years, I would say, in the state of Florida definitely has made a push towards technical education. You will see the boys gravitating with more intentionality towards the trades. Suncoast Technical College has a slogan. They say, careers in a year. And that model speaks directly to them. Hey, I can be making money in a year or less. That quicker return on investment definitely resonates with them. So we are definitely seeing more girls than boys, but I would also say it's how they're showing up. They're coming in a little more self-assured, more self-esteem. And that's kind of a contrast to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. So you see the shift.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Halpin, if I can continue the conversation with you. This is something I know I hear a lot of in my circles, whether it's family or friends. And Dr. Budakis talked about that early age where, boys, girls, they're expected to sit and be quiet, but it's sometimes easier for girls because development looks different in brain development. What are your thoughts on whether boys should begin preschool later than girls as that strategy to address gender gap in early learning? Why not?
Well, thanks for the question. But no, I don't believe that boys should start school later as it pertains to early learning. Neuroscience shows that all children's brain, regardless of gender, follow the same fundamental developmental timelines, especially in the first 5 years of life. From birth through age 5, the brain undergoes extreme rapid growth, forming over 1 million neural connections per second, creating the architecture for language, cognition, self-regulation, and learning. Brain development is experience dependent, meaning experiences during early childhood physically shape neurological circuits. Because these processes occur most rapidly in the preschool years, delayed, structured, high-quality early learning, even by 1 year, can mean missing a critical window for building foundational skills. This applies equally to boys and girls. Starting VPK at the same age ensures that all children receive enriched language exposure, guided social interaction, and cognitive stimulation when the brain is most receptive. Research confirms that while girls on average may reach certain milestones, such as language or fine motor skills, slightly earlier, these differences do not reflect faster or slower brain growth overall. Boys' brains are not developing later, they just develop differently within the same time frame. So high-quality VPK programs capitalize on sensitive developmental periods, setting the stage for success in school and beyond for all children, not just those perceived as ready.
Thank you for that. And can I follow up? I know we're talking about starting and getting in there for all of those different reasons, including what Dr. Boudakidis talked about, which is getting that intervention in place. What about repeating for that age delay?
So the data doesn't support repeating VPK is that much more effective either. So as far as my position, when I meet with families, you have to understand what that repeating and what you're giving up at the early age versus at the later age. So repeating VPK is all about a family's choice, but we do not recommend it. We would want those early exposures as quickly as possible and then have the families move on to kindergarten, where they can usually receive more support than they did in VPK as it relates to OT, PT, and speech assistance if a child would need that. So no, as far as I am concerned, when I talk to families, I kind of explain the whole thing. It, of course, goes back to the family's recommendation as to what they really want the child to do. But as a parent who had a child that went through an early ESE pre-K program because he needed additional support. He was a premature baby, then went into the VPK program. If that option would have been offered to me when my son was 4 years old, I would have taken that option of repeating VPK because it's what I needed, not what my son needed at the time. So he started kindergarten with his peers, successfully graduated high school, and then went on to having a career. So I think a lot of it with our families is having that conversation. Who really needs that additional year? Is it the family or is it the child?
Fair point. Thank you so much. Kim, I'd like to talk with you. Your foundation and the school district serve both boys and girls, but some may be wondering whether focusing on improving outcomes for boys could unintentionally then leave girls behind. Have you all seen any impact on girls with this?
Get asked that a lot. But in education, it's about improving outcomes. It's about improving outcome for one group of students does not mean that another group loses opportunities or support. So what we found through this work is that many of the instructional strategies that better engage boys actually benefited all students. That's girls, socioeconomic status, variations. When classrooms become more engaging and interactive, the responsiveness of how students learn, both boys and girls, they are achieving higher academic success. So what we're seeing is both bars are raising up and the gap is closing. The core of our work is recognizing that students do have different needs and working to ensure that our teachers are equipped and their classrooms are responsive to those differences. So we know students do not all learn the same way, so nor do they develop at the same pace or respond to the same environment. So the more we can equip our teachers with the flexible research-informed strategies, the more likely we are to create those classrooms where every student has that opportunity to succeed, and we are seeing that.
Thank you. Freddie, I want to come back to you because we talked about it a little bit earlier with video games, the big tech, and you touched on it a little bit when I spoke with you just a little bit ago about gamifying academics. Can you tell me what the Boys and Girls Club is doing when it comes to gamifying academics?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Courtney. And Dr. Halpin, I want to give a shout out to your VPK program. It's actually just left my daughter's VPK graduation this morning in Manatee County in your programs. And we too were wondering whether or not she can go to kindergarten, but she's definitely ready. And we're so excited for that. So thank you for your leadership and support in Manatee County. Video games and online worlds not going away. The issue has been around for a long time. It just looks a little bit different in today's day and age. The issue is not just the screen. The issue is that those spaces give young people something that they may not always feel in school or feel in home or feel in their community. If you heard earlier about the environment that it provides, the feedback that's provided for young people when they're in video games, the reality is it gives them clear goals, it gives them immediate feedback, it gives them a sense of community. They can create progress, they can create levels, they can create an identity, and they can create a sense of winning of something. And while looking at gaming and what it is, if you can frame it in that regard, you can see it as a potential under the right circumstances and the right environment to be a powerful tool. A lot of students, especially boys who are already falling behind academically, don't always feel that they have the same momentum in the classroom. Sometimes they feel that they're failing quietly, or that they may fall so far behind that it makes it very, very difficult for them to catch up. And once a young person starts feeling that their school's not for them, it's much harder to pull them back, especially our young boys. So we try to take that same approach, what engages young people in our Boys and Girls Club, and connect it to learning. So gamifying academics means that we're creating clear goals with them, visible progress, healthy competition, team challenges, and real recognition. And it could be in reading minutes, math practice, financial literacy, STEM, career exploration, or leadership development. The point is that to help young people see the effort leading to progress, and making sure that our progress is also aligned in Boys and Girls Clubs to the work that's happening in our public school systems, to ensure that the learning in schools and some of the innovative approaches that our school systems are taking are in alignment to what we're doing in Boys and Girls Clubs. I want to be clear that gaming is not the solution by itself. It really has to be the relationship that's tethered and that's supporting the gaming. The adult in the room matters the most, more so than the game. And gamification is really just a doorway. It gives us the reach to help connect to a young person, and then push them towards this deeper learning that's needed. You heard me reference my son, who's also in Manatee County Public Schools. We're fortunate because in Boys and Girls Club, we utilize a similar literacy platform called Lexia. And we try to limit screen time, but we find, because of the same gamification approach, and it makes me look like a cool dad, like I knew what I was saying with my wife, who's an attorney, that limiting the minutes, but connecting our son in a positive reinforcement to have the opportunity to play the game of Lexia, where they're really learning vocabulary and phonics and making sure that they're able to read at grade level. And he sees as a competition of finding ways he can get progress, and comes home. And sometimes we had a parent-teacher conference, have to back off a little bit, so he's not getting too far ahead, so it's not disruptive in classrooms. All that to say is aligning those practices in our Boys and Girls Clubs, parents having the opportunity to align those resources that exist in our public school systems at home, can make the gamification and gamifying learning fun and engaging and in a positive way.
Freddie, thank you for that. I know we're running up against the clock, but Thomas, I do have a question for you as we're talking about bridging the gender divide. Sometimes it seems that the issues maybe become more acute when we're looking at adulthood, we're looking at those teenage years. What do you see as some steps? Because I want to look at solutions here, some steps that we can really take to connect with young men in high school and inspire them to succeed, if that's that four-year school, that trade school, or other areas that you see.
I'll come back to the inspiration. But at Planet Sarasota, we believe in multiple pathways to success. It's not mutually exclusive. We intentionally say we want them to get an education beyond high school, and that could come in the form of a high value certificate, a technical degree, an associate's, a bachelor's, whatever is best for that student. The key paradigm shift is becoming a lifelong learner. That's the focus, is that in the era of AI, students need to be flexible, nimble, curious, resilient, and adaptable. And so they're going to have to learn to earn and earn to learn. So don't view education as a one-time path, but see it as an ongoing journey. With regard to our young men, we have to be very intentional about reaching out to them, connecting them. My fraternity does programs, works with them. Again, it's not against girls, but we have a focus on boys just because we have to play a little catch up there. The Education Foundation has a program called Future Ready Scholars, where high school students work one-on-one with a success coach to navigate toward their goals. So that's where, again, they can get that personal attention, has workshops and resources to help them get there. We encourage our partner programs such as Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, whatever we can do to impact them that way, and including programs on how to fund their future. And lastly, I just say with regard to the inspiration, we did a middle school career fair, because when high school, all of a sudden you find yourself, when you're waking up all of a sudden at the end of your junior year and saying, oh, I do want to go to school, it's often too late. So in middle school, we're having these career expos and bringing in companies all about the inspiration. Hey, bring your coolest stuff, bring the unbreakable windows, and we'll let kids throw fastballs at it. And then all of a sudden talk to them about being an engineer and how engineering is cool because you can do stuff like that. So those are the types of things. And those are the things that kind of also engage the boys. So reaching out to them where they are.
Thank you. And I know, again, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but panelists, if you would, I'm going to go through each of you, if you would offer quickly your closing thoughts. Dr. Halpin, let's start with you.
Sure. Early learning, regardless of gender, builds a foundation for lifelong and school success. Every child deserves equitable access to high quality early learning opportunities, programs that are rich, aligned with literacy, resources, and embedded within each of their communities. When all neighborhoods are supported with strong, inclusive early learning environments, children thrive, families are empowered, and our schools are stronger.
Kim.
I'm not as eloquent as that, my speech, but I think the attention on this is going to be, it is, we started the work in 2014 and we've trained almost 500 teachers, but we have a long way to go. And I think education is somewhere where every student's going, and it's a place where we can improve that engagement for students and making it the environment we want. So that's our area of focus. When you're investing in funding, how can you make that sustainable, long-lasting change? And so improving the quality of instruction is important for us. And I do believe the earlier children get into school, BPK programs, the better they are on that journey. So thank you.
Thomas.
In Sarasota County, the reading gap, third grade reading gap, is a 10-point swing between girls and boys. So there's no silver bullet. It's a little bit of all the above. If we can help them early and help them throughout the process, we'll have a better chance of getting them ultimately to where they need to be, whether, again, multiple pathways to success.
And Freddie. Hold on one sec.
We can't treat this as someone else's problem. Schools can't do it alone. Churches can't do it alone. Parents can't do it alone. Nonprofits can't do it alone. Nicole talked earlier about collaboration, connection, and convening being a multiplying effect. And that's exactly the way we need to look at this. If we're serious about closing the divide, we have to connect early in the classroom, VPK, after school programming, mental health, workforce readiness, and post-secondary pathways. We also have to change the message around what young people are hearing. You heard me mention earlier about it being kids holding on to every word. Young boys need to hear that reading is strength, asking for help is strength, graduating is strength, and showing up every day to do the work is strength.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, all, for your very thoughtful conversation this morning, for all that you've added. I know that this is going to help so many families and so many boys and girls in our community as well. Thank you for that. And then as we wrap up, raising awareness here of this critical issue, I'd like to bring in United Way Suncoast Chief Impact Officer and Interim CEO, Bronwyn Baytall, to close out the discussion. Bronwyn.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody that joined us on this panel. And thank you, Courtney. This was amazing. When children arrive on the first day of kindergarten, we all know that when they don't have the needed social and emotional skills that can set the stage for future learning. If they fall behind their fellow students, encounter behavioral problems, and find themselves on the wrong end of a suspension, challenges can compound. If they don't see themselves thriving on a college campus, succeeding in a skilled labor job, or rising through the ranks of corporate America, it will be more challenging to reach those achievements. But more importantly, they may not aspire to them. We already see how this issue is manifesting here in Tampa Bay, where more than 50,000 people between the ages of 16 and 22 are neither enrolled in school nor employed. The percentage of adolescents in this category grew by more than 11% last year, according to the Tampa Bay Partnership's latest Regional Competitiveness Report. So how can we help? I always like to come from a place of what's possible. And we can start with ourselves and challenge each other to do more for our boys and girls. Yes, that means supporting parents and caregivers of our children and remembering that we're all the adults in the room. And it's collectively our job to make sure we're listening. Our job is to make sure we're learning about all the outside factors influencing our children's lives. Our job is to make sure we're leading in a way that promotes the well-being of our boys while extending the success of our girls. So here's what we can do. Are you working in education or youth services? Factor the gender achievement gap into curriculum and planning. Refrain from promoting negative boy stereotypes and examine any potential biases. For all the males in our audience, consider being a mentor. We know your modeling and guidance holds greater resonance with some of our young boys. And collaborate with parents and caregivers and blend advice with accountability. Support much more on this topic and continue to raise awareness. It's so tempting to say that it's not my problem, but a thriving democracy requires an educated populace, and that takes all of us. That's why we always say, united we rise, united we win. Thank you again for joining us and for your expertise. Onward.